Hello. Before I even start, I'm just going to be quiet and show you a small video. So.
The human body generates more bioelectricity than a 120-volt battery and over 25,000 BTUs of body heat. Combined with a form of fusion, the machines had found all the energy they would ever need. There are fields now, endless fields, where human beings are no longer born. We are grown. For the longest time, I wouldn't believe it. And then I saw the fields with my own eyes. Watched them liquefy the dead so they could be fed intravenously to the living. And standing there, facing the pure, horrifying precision, I came to realize the obviousness of the truth. What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
So, now, for a start, that's a nice introduction. It is utter nonsense. And really, I'm not even going to go into how bad the science of that is, growing fields of humans to generate energy. That is really not the route we're going down. But on that tangent, the human battery. Yes, humans can be used a little bit like batteries. And I, in effect, want to create the Matrix, albeit a slightly gentler version. Apologies if you hadn't seen the film. I have just spoiled the film for you. But you've had a good chance, frankly. So the human battery, that is what I'm talking about, using humans as kind of generators of electricity. And that can be done in many, many different forms, and we're going to explore a few of them tonight. But to start off with, as I do all my talks, I like to just tell you who I am and why I come to be standing here. I'm particularly delighted to be standing here, actually, because I remember as I think I was a postgraduate student when I started my PhD, and for some reason I got to come in and have a tour around here, and I remember being up there and looking down and knowing this is where they do the lectures, and I've watched the lectures online, and I was kind of like, oh, I wish I could give one of those one day. So I'm here, and I'm quite excited to do it, because what a lovely place to give a lecture. So who I am is kind of this kind of, I feel this kind of sums me up in a bit of a way. If I start off here, that's me doing a competition called Fame Lab. So I am a science communicator. I kind of write and develop science shows and kind of tour around with them. I also, this is me during my PhD, the kind of funny onesie, because I spent a lot of time in a clean room, not because the things that I worked on were particularly dangerous, but I was more dangerous to them. So I worked on nanomaterials, and hairs or bits of skin falling from me, landing on my work, can potentially destroy all the work that's gone into it. This is me on stage with Robin Innes from the radio, some of you might have heard of, discussing dead duck necrophilia, because science takes you interesting places, is something I've discovered, and the things I've given talks on. That was actually an event where I was there to speak about toilet seat injuries in Glasgow. Which were more numerous than I'd dare imagine. And this is me on a trampoline, because sometimes people, probably not you, because I imagine a lot of you are scientists, but sometimes people genuinely forget that scientists are people too. Sometimes we see a trampoline in the back of a hotel ground and we want to jump on it, so we do, because we're quite normal people. So this kind of sums me up. Science communication, and occasionally trampolines. I'm also a salsa teacher as well. It probably should be up there, but slightly irrelevant tonight, unless everything goes horribly wrong, in which case we'll all be on our feet and find a partner. So, in my PhD, I always felt it difficult to describe. I am a chemist, but my undergraduate was in chemistry and physics, so to a point I was able to pass as a physicist. My PhD was in chemistry and electrical engineering, so as well I'm a bit of an engineer. I just basically kind of scientifically interested, indecisive and bad at biology. And in the group that I worked on, we worked on these kind of materials. So we worked on battery materials, looking at lithium-ion batteries and trying to improve the efficiency of them. We also looked at hydrogen storage materials. So could you, instead of using petrol, as we know we want to move away from fossil fuels, use hydrogen as a portable energy source? We looked at materials which could help regenerate bone. This is all kind of based on inorganic chemistry techniques. The engineering kind of fits in with really taking growing nanomaterials, growing new materials, and working them into kind of working devices was the ideal of the group. Superconductors as well, we did a little bit of that. And my particular area, not wine, but the thing that is cooling it, thermoelectronics. So that's generating electricity from temperature differences is what I was particularly interested in, and still am. So if we think, just to start off with, about energy, I've got a few things here. I've plotted some joules. So we measure energy in joules, as you're familiar with. I think that the best thing to do is to visualize. So we talk about many terms, how much energy this requires, how much energy that requires. It's quite an abstract thing. If we think about temperature, we know roughly, we know what 0 degrees Celsius is, we know what 100 degrees is. If we're talking about length, we know what a centimetre is, we know what a metre is. But when it comes to a joule, when it comes to measuring energy, it's a little bit more abstract. And I find a rather nice way to visualise it is taking something about 100 grams and from rest lifting it up about a metre. So we've given us 1 joule of potential energy. You've got MGH, mass, gravity and height. 1 joule of energy. You let it go, changes form into another form of energy. You get kinetic energy. Did I call the potential energy kinetic energy? Did I? I don't know. No. Okay. For a second, I misspoke. So change into kinetic. Finally, we hear it. Some of the energy absorbed by the table there. Again, conversion of energy. And I just do that just to give us a kind of benchmark of what 1 joule is. Now, although I give the egg 1 joule of energy, it does, because humans are inefficient machines, it takes me a little bit more than a joule to actually do that work. But if we start off with the egg kind of having 1 joule of energy, a hammer throw in the Olympics takes up about 3,400 joules of energy to throw that hammer. A gram of dynamite is actually surprisingly low, really. It's just because of the speed of reaction, but for just over 4,000 joules. And I think, quite impressively, a AA battery has 9,000 joules of energy stored up inside. Now, when you think about that in terms of eggs, that's 9,000 eggs lifted up 1 metre. And one of my little bugbears with technology these days is people like to hate on batteries. Oh, my battery's always running dead. Why are they going to make better batteries? Batteries are amazing. It's technology that's really, really energy hungry, and battery technology is struggling to keep up. But the batteries that we have, the batteries that we use, are actually quite sophisticated. They're actually really not bad at all in terms of storing energy, because energy is a difficult thing in terms of electricity just to store in a device. If I then add some other things into the mix, so here's about my food intake in joules in a day. So about 11 million joules. So 11 million eggs lifted up 1 metre is what I take in a day. The 420 million is actually what someone else takes in a day. I was amazed at this when I was comparing our diets. Michael Phelps eats over 400 million joules a day. And in fact, if you power Michael Phelps by batteries, you would need over 4,500 batteries every single day just to keep Michael Phelps powered along. So we're talking about huge amounts of energy that we are ingesting and just keeping ourselves powered like machines. But as I said, we're not totally efficient. We don't take that 11 million joules of energy and convert it into just exactly the amount we need. There's energy lost all the time. And that's what I look into. Energy harvesting, energy scavenging. So getting waste energy that wouldn't be otherwise used in an efficient way. For example, when we're walking around, we've got kinetic energy that we're kind of wasting in a way. We could be harvesting some of that. We're radiating heat all the time. Wasted energy. We could be reclaiming some of that. When we step, we're kind of compressing the floor. Energy that is of no kind of physical benefit to us, but could be used in some other areas. emerging technologies tend to start off with very niche applications. Generally, science is kind of new technologies is driven kind of by military or medical applications are two big drivers in emerging technologies. And certainly in energy harvesting, the military is kind of really looking into the technology. Because if we think about what a soldier has to carry, you know, they need a lot of essential supplies. If you'd then to equip them with a mobile phone like that, it really begins to cause a problem. Batteries are heavy, but soldiers might be working in very remote atmospheres. If they're working in desert conditions or Arctic conditions, they don't have availability to plug in a device and call for help. So we have to think, if someone was completely stranded in the middle of nowhere, could they, just by using the resources around them, generate enough electricity to power what they need? So in this example, maybe to kind of radio for help or something like that. So we're not necessarily just talking about what we'll be using, but starting off with the kind of niche applications is where the technology is emerging from. I put this in, when I was looking at kind of soldiers of the future, I am a fan of kind of mocking the Daily Mail when it tries to do science, God love it. And the Daily Mail came up with their soldier of the future, which I thought was extraordinary. So here we have the Daily Mail's vision of a soldier of the future. You'll see that it is possible that someday we will wear camouflage, which will disguise in wooded regions. One of their other huge goals is a helmet. As you can see, there are ear protectors in the helmet. Frankly, whether we'll get to that stage, who knows? And also glasses, not just normal glasses, tinted glasses. I believe they help in sunny conditions. But we are developing new technology. I mean, they have missed out on completely. So if we start to think about some of the areas, kinetic powered watches are not new. They are something that have been around a long time. If you're thinking about just kind of magnets moving in a coil, moving things around and generating electricity, but just kind of scaling up the kinetic devices that are in watches and sticking them in a soldier's backpack. So this little tube here that's been just stuck onto the side is a kinetic harvester. So, yes, it does add a little bit extra weight, but while that person is walking around, just as the thing moves, particularly kind of left-right, kind of undulating motions, can generate electricity. So what would happen is you would plug this device into a laptop or a battery and store some of that electricity. You're talking tiny, tiny amounts, but all through this talk, I'm kind of saying that anything is better than nothing. Reclaiming a little bit helps, because every little helps. And so, is that Tesco or something? This is kind of the Tesco approach to energy production, and that really we are thinking every little helps. So starting off thinking, right, someone is moving. Something that's moving is probably wasting a little bit of energy. Let's get a little bit of that back. I'm not a huge fan of these ones, just because that's quite a substantial bit of kit for someone to carry around. The kinetic harvesters are a little bit big, but they do give fairly good feedback. So another way, instead of just sticking something in a backpack, now these I'm quite keen on, putting devices on knees, so areas that are moving. And they can generate a surprising amount of electricity. There is enough, just by using these leg braces, kind of carbon fibre leg braces, you would get enough to power a cell phone, certainly. We're not talking kind of the iPhone 6, you know, here this person's not going to be playing apps and things like that, but we're talking remote atmospheres. You're talking about getting that essential phone call, essential text out. These would be enough. So stick things in the backpack, stick things on the legs, capturing some of that motion. Kind of 2.5 watts you'd be getting out of kind of decent leg braces. Another one that I think is really quite exciting and has quite an interesting history is piezoelectrics. So piezo is coming from the Greek of kind of pressing to produce electricity. And that's kind of what it is. That's what it says in the tin. It is a material like quartz that when you press it or distort it, when you introduce stress into the crystal, it produces a voltage. which can be used. If you think about the crystal structure sitting quite happily, the electric dipoles all kind of cancelling each other out and sitting quite happy, you're distorting that and changing the layout of the crystal, and you're kind of creating a slightly negative charge on one side, a slightly positive charge on the other, that potential difference creating a useful voltage. So these you could be putting into shoes. That's certainly one example that you could be putting, and you can get up to about 7 watts just by each kind of step pushing into the ground. You know, that's quite substantial. And again, if these devices are small and light, then hopefully they shouldn't be interfering with your day-to-day movement. You shouldn't notice that they're there. You're going to be wearing shoes anyway. You're just inserting something slightly extra in there that should, unobtrusively, generate electricity with every single step. And again, these might, I mean, you could have them just kind of feeding back. You could have wires going to a battery. You could have a battery in the shoe, and just getting some of that back. Charging batteries on the go would be the goal of these. If I just show you one, you may even have come across this. If you've been to Terminal 3 in Heathrow.
Power Flow, Not a Step Wasted, is the winning project of the first edition of Ferrovial Innovation Awards. Currently in the prototype phase at Heathrow Airport, it consists of the creation of a floor made up of tiles capable of converting travellers' steps into electricity. As they walk, their footsteps light up a panel so that travellers feel part of the airport infrastructure.
We ended up with a corridor that links the IDO, which is the main seating area in Terminal 3, which one of the piers. It's quite a boring, normal corridor with white walls that doesn't really say much to anyone when they walk through it, but it's a perfect location for this because flow is in one direction, you get quite a lot of footfall, and you've got potential to improve that passenger experience in that area. We want.
So in Heathrow Terminal 3, they used piezoelectrics as a novelty, to be honest. It was not a particularly useful thing. As they said, it was about creating, making the passengers feel more connected by the fact that they take a step and they see some response. They feel part of the building somehow. And again, a lot of these technologies did start off with little quirky things, like can we try something new? So look out for that one. That was in 2012, they installed those pressure pads. So that's instead of in the shoe, that's capturing still the motion, but they're embedded in the floor. You wouldn't notice they were there, apart from the coloured lights. Fast forward a couple of years, this is at a train station in France, and these are piezoelectric pads as well. These are, unlike Heathrow, not used just for novelty, but they're actually used productively. So that it's an area which has high footfall. People wouldn't necessarily know they were standing on anything different, just these different coloured tiles. But these are piezoelectric elements, and they have USB plugs in the seats. So people can charge their phones while other people are walking by. They also feed into the lighting, and they're reclaiming about 30% of the energy that they initially used for lighting the area just by people stepping on these pressurised pads. And I have been told quite excitingly that the Glasgow City Council are investing in a piezoelectric dance floor as well, because actually a disco with a piezoelectric floor, the motion of people dancing is actually enough to power apparently about 60% of the disco, which is quite extraordinary when you think about really unobtrusive, unseen techniques. There's also areas, I think they started initially in Israel, trying roads, so roads with cars going over them and reclaiming electricity from that. They're getting quite substantial returns from that. The difficulty is that finding the correct materials. So some of the best piezoelectric materials are lead-based, and the idea of coating our roads in lead and putting lead in our shoes and things like that is not appealing. So there is a kind of trade-off with how rare and how difficult the materials are to make and how expensive and how wide an area you can cover with them. There are also commercial applications. So piezoelectrics are in some generations of remote controls. So this doesn't have a battery. It's never going to run dead. Literally, as you push the button, you're generating just enough little electricity there to send that infrared signal to your TV. So that doesn't even need a battery. There is also, I want to go off on a little bit of a historic tangent on piezoelectrics, because one thing I'm fascinated. I'm a huge fan of Marie Curie, of all the Curies, and the interconnectivity of the French scientific elite of the day is just extraordinary. I try to get my head around it and fail often. So piezoelectrics was initially predicted by Antoine Becquerel, who was grandfather to Henry Becquerel, probably more famous. Antoine Becquerel predicted piezoelectrics, but wasn't able to prove it experimentally. His son discovered the photovoltaic effect, and his grandson discovered radioactivity. So that's quite an illustrious family right there. Second illustrious family, so Becquerel predicted piezoelectrics, but Jacques and Pierre Curie proved it when they were 21 and 24, which is slightly galling. I mean, that's extraordinary. They discovered piezoelectrics that early on. But then, interestingly, Pierre got his Nobel Prize for radioactivity shared with the grandson of Becquerel, who predicted piezoelectrics. That's kind of our first kind of crossover connection. Obviously married Marie Curie as well. Marie Curie not so interested in piezoelectrics. That was kind of their younger days before Marie Curie kind of convinced, contrary to kind of popular opinion at the time, it was Marie Curie who drew Pierre away from his work and into hers, rather than people stupidly credited Pierre for, you know, the genius. But Marie Curie was quite extraordinary. The next link is an even more unusual one. It's the first practical use of piezoelectrics. So Pierre and Jacques came up with the concept, proved it, and it was first used by Paul Langevin, who discovered that it could be used for kind of creating ultrasonic frequencies and put in process the development of radar and sonar that was used in World War I, World War II. So using these piezoelectrics, because the effect works in reverse, put electricity in, create crystal vibrations, create ultrasonic waves, and you can detect or send ultrasonic waves. Paul is also famous for having an affair with Marie Curie, which at the time was a huge scandal. The abuse that Marie Curie got was absolutely horrific, because Marie Curie, Pierre had died at this point, and they had an affair. But there is almost a kind of odd happy ending in that the Curies and the Langevins kind of connected again. So this is Marie Curie's daughter, Marie Curie's granddaughter, who then married Paul Langevin's grandson. So the two families did end up connected in a way. I realize I tried to kind of put them all together. So what we have here is, first of all, we have the piezoelectric connection. So we have the kind of granddad and Pierre and Jacques there. So that's one of the connections there. Then we can tie in the Curies with the Becquerels with more radioactivity. So that's the kind of radioactivity connection going on there. Pierre was supervisor to Paul, and Paul was supervisor to Irene during their PhD. You then have a connection, kind of carnal connection, Marie Curie and Pierre and Paul. But then finally you have a family connection in that all the Curies and all the kind of the Langevins are eventually connected through marriage or through blood. And that's just three of the families. I mean, it's just extraordinary. If you throw Rutherford, Kelvin, and Einstein into there as well, the diagram gets absolutely massive. I mean, these are fascinating characters, and the time they were living in, when you just came up with something completely new. You know, piezoelectricity is a thing. How extraordinary. And yes, they were all friends together, and I'm going off on real tangents here. There was a letter discovered from Poland that thanked Lord Kelvin for all his help to do with Marie Curie. And the library have utterly no idea what it's about. We know that Lord Kelvin did something quite helpful to the Curies, but we don't know. And then through tweeting this, someone suggested that Lord Kelvin calibrated the piezoelectric device that Pierre had created. I mean, I probably just sound like I'm throwing names at you now. That's how I kind of feel. But the extraordinary. So that's the kind of myriad of connections. moving away from piezoelectrics and thinking still about mobile energy, but this is not something you would harvest from yourself. We do also work on hydrogen storage, and this is what we're battling against, because people think hydrogen, they think transport, they think Hindenburg, which is not the case. You know, we're driving towards much safer technologies. You can buy hydrogen-powered vehicles, motorbikes, and cars. You can also buy hybrids that are kind of half and half. And we're kind of looking at some of the materials. So what you're thinking is like lithium nitride is quite a good kind of starting material for hydrogen storage. So you're taking light elements and you're working hydrogen into their structure. Hydrogen that can be liberated when you want it. It's there to dip in and out of when you need it, but it will be fairly stable. You also want it to be reversible without getting to hugely high temperatures. So the idea is that you can drive in, instead of filling up your tank with petrol, maybe overnight you could plug in your source of hydrogen, or you could also have drums that you could take out and replace something quite easily. Lithium nitride, an interesting material as well, because it's also a battery material. What you can see here is the great big, here's the nitrogens and little lithiums. It's quite an interesting structure because you see in the middle there's just a whole layer of lithium, and those can be conducted very quickly along. So you've got this kind of plane of lithium. So it's used in some batteries as a kind of lithium conductor, but also in some circumstances as a hydrogen storage. We also look at like kind of magnesium, so it's just taking light metals, because you want something nice and light if you're going to be putting it in a car, because the heavier it is, the worse it is. So something nice and light, magnesium's a good one. React it with hydrogen, you've got the hydrogen bound there, because you don't want the Hindenburg. You don't want a huge balloon filled with flammable gas strapped to the top of your car. You don't want to compress hydrogen, because you'd be effectively having a rocket in the back of your car. You know, if the top came off that cylinder, you'd be in orbit. So you want something that will store the hydrogen fairly safely and compactly. So here's kind of the sizes. You know, if you take hydrogen and store it just as a compressed gas, how much space it would take up. You can liquefy it. That takes quite a lot of energy. Again, it's very difficult and dangerous to store. And down other kind of materials, kind of the light metal, bound there as a crystal, locked away for when you need it. So it's safe, it's compact, and it's quite light. And those are the kind of desired materials for storing your hydrogen. So those are one of the things that we work on as well. So my actual kind of, my real kind of interest is in thermoelectronics. So I mentioned the kinetics, I mentioned piezoelectrics, I mentioned hydrogen storage, which would be a car. Again, this is an energy harvesting technique. So thermoelectronics it's been around for a while. It has been around since the 1800s, but it was ignored. It was discovered and kind of treated as a bit of a kind of parlour game, kind of like, oh, isn't that interesting? And ignored until now, until the idea of harvesting waste energy is something, ooh, that's quite interesting. Because what it means is thermoelectronics. You've got thermal, so it's about heat. It's about hot sides and cold sides. Electronics is about producing electricity. So what you have is a hot side and a cold side produce electricity. And that's exactly what thermoelectrics do. I've got some thermoelectrics here. These are little things. You can buy them on eBay. And basically, this little pad, if I heat one side up and I keep the other side cooler, it will produce electricity, which is genius. I think it's quite exciting. And so if you think about a person, so this is me on a thermal imaging camera, and we're radiating heat all the time. Even when we're resting, we're burning up like one of those old-fashioned now, 50-watt bulbs. So we're giving off a lot of wasted energy that can be used productively. And interestingly, not all animals burn the same way. I mean, you can see a huge temperature difference between this scorpion and a person. Or in the first picture, that's a snake coiled around, not my hand, but coiled around a hand. And you see the temperature difference. And when you think about the energy we're intaking, that's why I need to take in 11 million joules and eat every few hours, whereas an alligator can potentially go up to 2 years without eating. And that's in no small part because of the way they heat themselves, because they're not radiating energy all the time like we are. Again, it was, all the scientific elite were connected. The first effect, it's made up of 3 effects. It's made up of the Seebeck effect. And Seebeck discovered that if you heat 2 dissimilar metals, they'll create a voltage. So he was just kind of heating a metal, and there was a voltage produced. What he did was he got 2 different metals, I don't know why, put them together, heated them up, and put a compass inside. And he saw the compass kind of twitching and moving. So he was generating electricity, generating an electric field, and deflecting the magnet. Peltier discovered that if you put electricity into 2 dissimilar metals, they will create a hot side and a cold side. He discovered the exact opposite. So Seebeck was hot side, cold side, electricity. Peltier was hot side, cold side, makes. No, the other way. Electricity makes hot side and cold side. And William Thomson, at the time, Thomson effect, tied these all together and helped kind of put into kind of one box and call it the thermoelectric effect, this reversible effect. So here it is here. Inside the devices, you'd see lots of little metal cubes. They're semiconducting cubes, and half of them are N-type semiconductors, half of them are P-type. And to think about that, if you think about an N-type semiconductor as, just humour me, a material that has too many electrons. And if you think about a P-type semiconductor as having not enough, or kind of missing electrons or positive holes. If you pair these up, and then we heat them from underneath, the electrons diffuse away from the hot sides. The positive holes diffuse away from the hot sides. So you connect those 2 up, and you have a net negative flow. So as long as you keep one side hot and keep the other side cold, they'll continue to produce electricity. So no moving parts, and fairly indestructible. I have some working thermoelectrics here, that if I use myself as a hot side, I've got some ice, and we'll see if we can get this working. There we go. So hopefully if I can get a good enough thermal contact with the ice, then hopefully just using the heat from my hand, the temperature difference created should, with a nudge, yes, that's not me, that's not just me. I'm hearing cracking as well. I hope that's not glass. So it's not particularly spectacular. The reason is it's not in great thermal contact with the ice, but there's no battery here. There's no energy stored inside this device. It's just the heat from my hand compared to the coldness of ice that's generating electricity. So these are really an energy harvesting technique that could go everywhere. So if I cover them, if I cover my body, we can get about 60 milliwatts per centimetre. You're not going to want to cover yourself head to toe in these, but the larger the area you cover, the better they are. You can, again, things seem to start off with watches. If you can do it, make it into a watch. So there are thermoelectric watches. The small fridges use the devices in reverse. So that's putting the electricity in, creating the hot side, creating the cold side. And also, I think really exciting, is the Voyager space probes. This is how the Voyager space probes work. Just like these little devices. They were sent up with a red-hot plutonium source, which sits in this little leg here. So that's just sitting, cooling down, giving off its waste heat, and all around it is strapped kind of little thermoelectric devices that are absorbing that heat, converting it into electricity, and powering the onboard computers. Now, if you'd sent up a tank of petrol, it would long since run dry. It's far too far, having just reached the kind of edge of our solar system and left. It's too far from the sun to generate electricity with solar panels. So really, thermoelectronics is a fantastic way. It is cooling down. It's producing less electricity every single day, but it's still reporting back. It's still working pretty well. You can actually go and it's quite sad actually, you can go on the NASA website and just watch its power just slowly decline as it gets further and further away. But still a very exciting thing, you know, powered by these little devices right here. It's also how the Mars Rover is powered. The Mars Rover does have kind of solar panels and things like that as well, but it does have this kind of backup of thermoelectronics, because thermoelectronics don't need the sun. They don't need anything else. You just put it in a box and it will continue to run until there's no more hot side left. So one thing I think is a little bit of a shame. The Rosetta mission, obviously the little filly, landed on a comet, a huge, fantastic feat, but it's now dead because the battery ran out on it. Had Philly had thermoelectronics on board, it would still be reporting back. Had it had thermoelectronics on board, it would have been too heavy to land on the comet, so it wouldn't have been on the comet. But still, you know, they could have asked me. And I think that's because it couldn't see the sun, so it instantly runs dead, because it depended on something external. Whereas if it had these little pads and a thermoelectric device, I wish they'd tried it now, it'd be still giving us some information. Making thermoelectronics better is really tricky. That's what I tried to do. This equation sums up how well one works. How good is your thermoelectronic material? This is kind of what we do. So ZT is how we measure it. We call that the figure of merit. S is the Seebeck efficient. That's kind of how much voltage do you get out for your temperature difference. We have the conductivity on the top. So conductivity is very important. That's the temperature, balance of the T at the other side. And K there is the thermal conductivity. So basically, if you ignore everything else, you have electrical conductivity divided by thermal conductivity. That's not a good situation to be in if you want to make something bigger. Because if you could say, right, well, what we'll do is we'll make something really great at being an electrical conductor. We'll make the top part of the equation really huge, brilliant conductor. But the thing is, if you make something a really good conductor of electronics, it's going to be a really good thermal conductor. So if you increase one, you also increase the other. And you say, right, okay, we'll make it a really terrible thermal conductor. It'll be like wood. Nothing will pass through it. Electrons won't pass through it either, and it'll be a terrible conductor. So trying to separate these out and tease them out is a really, really difficult thing to do. Because if electrons travel through a material, they basically take the temperature with it. They take the heat along with them, and that's a huge part. And you can't stop that. If the electrons are going, you can't cool them down midway. The electrons are going to go, and that's fine. So the only thing you can do is try and stop heat from transferring through the lattice, rather than going with the electrons. And that's one thing we try and do. One thing we try and do is make them smaller. Everything is about nano. Everyone loves nano, so we try and reduce the dimensions. That's because if you think about heat travelling through a crystal as a wave, if you make nanomaterials and press them back together, electrons don't care. They'll just walk through one crystal straight into another crystal. They're kind of unfussy. This little kind of heat wave passes through. If it gets to the edge of a crystal, it won't want to go through it. It'll want to stay where it is. It wants to stay in that initial crystal. It doesn't like boundaries. So it just doesn't pass through quite as well. And you get less thermal transport if you've got all these tiny, tiny little crystal boundaries all pressed up next to each other. When I talk about nanotechnology, I like to throw this up. Nanotechnology doesn't look like little robots like that. It's not tiny little batteries and tiny little motors all on the nanoscale, or these little hooks hooking onto viruses, or swarms of nanobots chasing people. Really, really, no. I mean, nanotechnology, this is kind of my nanotechnology. That's not going to chase anyone. It doesn't have a motor. It doesn't have grabby little hands. It's just a little array of tiny, tiny, tiny wires. Just looks like grass growing in a field. It's just a lot smaller. And these are the kind of things that I grow. Well, I wish mine looked as nice as that. These are beautiful examples. And I do it in a really simple way. I heat up the elements. I use two elements. I use bismuth and tellurium. Two of my favourite elements. Bismuth, to be fair, it's pretty boring. But I'm fond of it in a quaint way. Tellurium, I love just because it has a novelty property. And any element with a novelty property is okay with me. If you touch it, if you breathe it in, you smell of garlic, which is just an extraordinary effect. It's one of two elements that do that. Selenium will also do it. Tellurium will also make your nails turn black. and eventually third stage is that you die. But I've had tellurium poisoning 3 times, and I've only got to stage 1, so I smell of garlic. There was a person in Glasgow who was put off the bus because he smelt so strongly of garlic from breathing in tellurium. So I grow them, and just in these little tubes, I heat up the elements, and they grow on top of substrates, little surfaces, little silicon surfaces, and I just see how the crystals grow naturally. What shape do they want to be in? And then can I force them to be something different? So I grew like this sheet. This sheet is just kind of about 6 atomic layers thick or so. It's really, really thin, but it's huge. It spawns out across. And that's because of the way the material, bismuth telluride, that I grow, this is the crystal structure, grows in huge planes. It loves growing, spreading out over large areas. It doesn't like going up and down so much, but it loves spreading out. And something that I spent a lot of time doing microscopy, so growing little wires, little plates, pressing these all together, they will work a little bit more efficiently. And partly just because there's also quantum confinement effects, kind of trapping electrons once you get down to really small dimensions. But primarily, if you take a thermoelectric, you smash it into nanocrystals and press it back together, it will probably work a little bit better, because you've introduced these little imperfections that stop the thermal transport going through it. And that's what you want. The ideal is an electron crystal phonon glass. That's what it's called. And what that's saying is basically you want something that conducts electrons like a metal, and you want something that transfers heat like glass. And that's what you're trying to create. Other ways that they're doing, this is the model of a scutter ruddite, and what that is you can see there's kind of these, I forget which atoms are involved in this one, but you have large atoms in kind of almost cage-like structures. And when heat is passing along, kind of heats up the things in the middle, and they can kind of rattle around. They've got a little bit more freedom to move, and so that kind of absorbs some of the energy, kind of creating rattles inside a crystal cage. And that's absorbing some of the phonons, stopping them from transferring all the way through. So the heat doesn't get all the way to the cold side because it's being disrupted. Some things are stealing energy, using it as a little bit of movement. Similarly, I thought I had another one. Yes, I do. Similarly, we can put molecules in huge cages as well. The heat kind of travels along, creating these vibrations. It hits that molecule in the centre, which is a lot of free space to move around in. And it just kind of shakes and waves around, and it stops the heat getting all the way through the crystal. But electrons will just fly right through it. They're fine. I was just going to tell you a little bit about bismuth as well. Tellurium, I said about the garlic. This is bismuth, absolutely beautiful kind of semi-metal. You see these lovely oxide colours. I'm a science communicator in no small part due to my family, who are homeopaths, and my mother has just finished a course in energy healing, and she has a crystal, many crystals in her house because they promote telepathy. So I have a big bugbear, and that's why I preach science to as many people as I can. Bismuth, you can find on a site that my mother uses. I love this. Bismuth relieves symptoms of isolation, both spiritually and emotionally. As a stone of transformation, it calms disorders and helps push change in the right direction, with physical vitality connecting to all that is. I've spent 5 years working on it. It doesn't. I emailed them to tell them they weren't happy. Some of the things I've done, this is a difficult thing to describe. This is how you measure how something works. When it's a nanoscale thing, how do you know how well it conducts heat? It's really difficult to tell. It's difficult. It's easy enough to say if you've got a big block of metal and you can create a hot side here, create a cold side, and work out how well it transfers through. If I give you a nanowire, it's very difficult to heat up one side without heating up the other. And so this was kind of the idea that we're kind of working on. You create this little bridge, and you put a little nanoparticle in the middle, and you use an electrical circuit on one side. So here, you can touch that one and flow electrons around the copper, and it'll heat up a little bit. Actually, nickel chromium, heat up a little bit. The other side's just going to be cold. You drop a little particle on the middle there. So you're heating up one side, and then you see what happens at the other side. So it's a way of trying to measure something that's maybe kind of a few nanometers or a few microns wide, just connecting it, a little electrical circuit on one side, a little electrical circuit on the other, and see how the resistance changes at either side. And that'll give you an idea of how much heat is transferring through. So where could thermoelectronics be used? Well, this is not true. This was a Photoshop job. But this woman here has these little pads in her wellies at a festival, so somewhere remote, and they're absorbing heat from her feet, and they're powering her phone. Similarly, here, you could have thermoelectrics wrapped around areas of high blood flow. It shouldn't cause you much inconvenience, but plug that back in, and during the day, it just adds a little bit to your phone. Now, again, you're never going to power an iPhone through it, but you could power simple devices. You could power little sensors, medical sensors. Another area that it's used, so you've got space applications, you've got wearable ones, you've also got cars. So cars waste about 70% of their energy as heat, which is absolutely extraordinary. Only about 30% actually makes it go. A lot of heat wasted. So you just take these little devices and you slap them on the underneath of the car. It absorbs the heat and it generates electricity. Use it to power the radio, to power the lights, things like that. And as long as one side's hot, one side's cold, it'll carry on working. You can see here this is an exhaust pipe, and it's just literally can be retrofitted. Just stick them on all around. Anywhere there's a temperature difference. If you think anywhere there's a temperature difference, it can be used. Someone suggested on aircraft. You have a very cold outside, you have a warm inside, thermoelectronics down the middle, free electricity. That's what it is. It's free electricity. There's no moving parts. There's very little to go wrong. And they will just keep working. As long as there's a hot side and a cold side, they'll keep on going. So they have been used as this slightly terrifying device is monitoring some sort of brain activity, and it's powered by thermoelectronics. The ideal with these is for medical sensors, they're not going to break down, they're not going to run out of battery. You know, if you're thinking about medical alerts or something like that, then as long as they're attached to the body and as long as that body is warm, it's going to produce electricity. And there's enough in a medical sensor or a little alert thing, just enough to get them functioning and working, never having to worry about a battery running out again. There is also to the more extreme scale of energy harvesting from humans, there are now devices that will metabolize blood sugar. So actually physically installing devices into people, again medical sensors, that will use sugar from blood. So again, no batteries, it will never run out, it will continue to power it. There's also recently, just past few months, I think, there was someone who installed jewellery into veins and used the motion of the circulatory system to power a small motor, which I think is incredibly grim. And not a kind of energy harvesting technique that I would go down. This really was done as a kind of promotional stunt, and it certainly works. People latched onto it. But there are devices, piezoelectric ones actually, that could wrap around, and the circulatory system, the pulsing of your blood is enough to create a little bit of motion and harvest that electricity. So basically, the way we get our energy is changing. And one thing we're going to have to change is not just thinking about electricity coming out of a plug. We're having to think about how we use energy and where we can get energy from. And there are many, many different techniques. And as I said, every little helps. So some of these devices will, no doubt, come into our technology. Some of them won't. We don't really know. Going back to the kind of 1800s, when piezoelectrics, thermoelectronics were discovered, they were just seen as quirks. And they were ignored until, I'd say, maybe the past 15, 20 years. Pretty much. There wasn't a huge investment. Now we're seeing the number of papers published each year huge, doubling every single year in these fields as we race to try and make things a little bit better. And someone somewhere kind of said something about what would have happened, what would the world be like if, when these were discovered, they weren't just seen as novelties, but that was actually the route we went down. Instead of the electromagnetic route, what if we'd started looking more at thermoelectronics, piezoelectronics? What kind of devices would we be using now? And I think that's quite exciting. The last example, I found it recently that on oil rigs and things like that, places where there are no people, you can install these devices and just let them run. Apparently charging, I can't even imagine how this is true, and I did just read it on the internet, so it may not be, but apparently charging a battery on an unmanned kind of oil rig or remote sensor costs €1 million. I don't understand how that can possibly be, but a single charge on one of these remote stations, €1 million. That seems a little too high, but it could be something that's cut. Russia was the first to kind of use these in oil fields, where they don't need people, just slap them on and let them run, use thermoelectronics. Power stations and things like that. Once a power station is built, it's very difficult to start changing bits and pieces of it, but it's very easy to stick thermoelectronics, to stick these little pads anywhere, in your home, on yourself, and free electricity. So, thank you very much. So there's some time for questions and things like that, if anyone has any. There's also microphones at the back. Yes, there's one down here. We do have to wait for the microphone, not just because it's being recorded and things like that, and so that everyone else can hear, even if I can't.
Nice talk. Interesting. There are three things. One, you didn't mention thermocouples at all, which is the reverse of what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Second thing is oil, when it comes up out of the offshore or something like that, it's hot. Mm-hmm. So you've got always heat, so you could have those things. And the third thing is you mentioned hydrates a couple of times. Can you enlighten a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, thermocouples, the reverse of thermoelectronics, I didn't mention much. As one as one application is improved, then the other is improved a little as well. The reverse is improved. The reverse is just something I've never thought much of. It's always been about temperature difference and electricity. The oil coming up from the ground, I don't know if that's an application they've looked at, but thermoelectronics is something they've thought about for kind of geothermal energies before. One limitation, again, comes back to the materials. So the best thermoelectronic is bismuth telluride. Tellurium, slightly toxic, but also fairly rare. So you're limited to the applications of those. So one thing they're doing is working on bismuth telluride to get the best possible material, then use the improvements made on that material to use kind of silicon germanium or something like that, something more abundant that could be used. And so that's it, kind of investigate the best material and then apply it to others that are less good. Hydrides and things like that, I do know less about that. One way that we're kind of making them is by ball milling and grinding in hydrogen or ammonium atmospheres, grinding metals and combining. And the magnesium and magnesium hydride is just magnesium and hydrogen. The lithium ones, I'm not sure how they are ball milled again, and sometimes with looking at ammonia storage or hydrogen storage, and there's a certain degree of reversibility. If you go up to 300 degrees Celsius, you can remove all the hydrogen, and then later on you can put all the hydrogen back on. But 300 degrees Celsius isn't ideal for cars. So looking at more under 200 degrees, you can maybe liberate, if you're talking about hydrides, you're talking about the kind of three hydrogens, you may be talking about liberating just the one, and just kind of flirting between the two structures. Which really isn't the best answer. Any others? Yep, there's one right at the front there.
Two questions, please. What is the theoretical maximum you can get out of, say, a human body? And the second thing, is it possible to use thermoelectric coatings that you could simply paint onto something?
Yeah, so the first one, the maximum
Yeah.
you could get from the body. From a body temperature, you'd be looking at 30 microwatts per centimetre. And that's assuming there's a kind of temperature difference between you and the outside environment of 5 degrees. That is working at, I think, less than 1% of efficiency. Really, it's low efficiency. It's a very small temperature difference that you're working with, and you just have to decide how much of an area you would want to cover. And the second question, sorry, just remind me.
Could you get coatings that you could...
Coatings. Yes. Coatings are one thing that people are starting to look at. One area that the coatings have been used, they've looked at kind of thermoelectric paints. That's something that people have started kind of investigating, but also as coatings that could potentially go underneath photovoltaic panels, so underneath solar panels. So solar panels are fairly good, but there's a whole range that they don't get any benefit from. So they only can use kind of higher end version of the light. But if you think going right down, collect in some of that IR, then you're making very, very efficient solar panels that are using light and heat. And that would be a kind of coating just in the matrix of the solar panels. But these are new ideas that are just starting. The default has always been blocks, little kind of millimetre cubed blocks. Any other questions? No? Yep, there's one in the middle there.
Being a very old-fashioned scientist, I tend to believe there's no such thing as a free lunch. And, for example, in your piezoelectric effect, surely you're going to get some additional work required by the person who's doing the walking in order to generate that stuff. How much extra work do you have to do as a percentage of the electricity you get out?
Yeah, so that is true, especially thinking piezoelectrics, depending on the, you're really thinking about having to put a bit of pressure in there. These devices are designed not to be used if there is any noticeable difference to the user. I've never tried piezoelectric shoes, and I'm curious to. They're talking about kind of 7 watts, and that's a compression of 1 centimetre you're looking, and that's quite a substantial compression. So I don't know. I would like to experience what it feels like to know. I know in kinetic harvesters, so if you're thinking about, that's the one I was very sceptical about those. I thought there's going to be real resistance in bending your knee, but they've built them in a way that they will only harvest at certain times. So when when the knee straightens or bends, it will cut in and cut out at points where it feels, no, you'd have to be putting work in. So it's maybe like kind of to straighten your leg, it doesn't harvest anything from that motion because it realizes you don't want it. But on the kind of following compression, where you're not expending energy, it does harness some of that movement. So if you're straightening, nothing, but then as your leg naturally bends up again, it's reclaiming that. So they are specifically designed in a way to minimize interference or minimize noticeability, but you are right, there is effort put in, but hopefully not a noticeable one. Any others? Yep.
I was just wondering if there are any sort of emerging centres of activity in this, or is it very much in its infancy, or where would you expect it to become?
So yeah, there are certainly, in terms of thermoelectronics, which I know best, kind of almost as you'd expect, and China racing away and doing a lot. To some extent, partly the resources. They have a lot of the precious elements that it's made of. Japan has always shown an interest in this kind of area, but mainly China. America have quite an industry as well, and Denmark. Slightly surprisingly, but Denmark have created centres and look into thermoelectronics as well. I'm not sure if that's a kind of historical thing. I'd imagine it is. The UK isn't exactly blazing a trail. It does investigate them. My PhD in particular was set up to Glasgow were like, well, let's have a punt on thermoelectronics. Let's get one person and see how it goes. And they've got a few postdocs working on it now. But primarily China, followed by America, and Denmark punching above its weight, certainly in thermoelectronics.
Hello, I was just wondering, is there a significant cooling effect when you're using the thermoelectronics?
Yeah, so one side would be a kind of heat sink. Hopefully you shouldn't notice. It should just be in the way that if you are wearing your watch, it becomes the same temperature as you. You shouldn't really. If it was a very efficiently cooled watch, you would notice it being slightly cooler than your body temperature. But it shouldn't feel cold against your skin just because it's not actively cooling, really. It's kind of ambiently cooling. It's just your heat moving the electrons inside rather than it being a kind of source of cold applied to your skin. So it's not kind of tenaciously withdrawing heat. It's just that the ambient heat is passing through it. And not all the heat that passes through is then lost on the other side as heat because some of it has moved the electrons and some of it is taken away as electricity. So you shouldn't, I'm certainly, when I do such an extreme example as that, I notice my hand getting cold, but that's because I've actively applied a cold side. So if it's just an ambient thing, you wouldn't notice it at all. Any others? I'm so delighted that you all came along to listen to me talk about energy harvesting. I think it's really exciting. I think all these little devices are extraordinary, and the history of them and the idea, ignored for a good couple of kind of 100 years, and then kind of all of a sudden, oh, isn't this interesting? And they're throwing money at it because the idea of kind of this, energy is a buzzword in science. Any way of generating energy is Honda, Volkswagen, and BMW have all started including thermoelectronics in their newer models of cars. And that started as a novelty. They weren't really working. They were just kind of like, ooh, you need this. It was in their really flash models. Like, you don't have a thermoelectric? Oh, hang on, upgrade to one that has. It didn't really do much at all, but they are starting to become actively useful. And so you can kind of watch out for these little things popping up every now and then. Doorbells as well, piezoelectric doorbells. That was the kind of one of their first commercial applications. So you don't need a battery, it just rings on its own from the energy of someone pushing it. Yep.
Again, I read on the internet recently that if you could cover all the deserts of the Earth with solar panels, you could generate all the world's electrical usage in 6 hours. Now, I understand solar power is developing, and I don't know what stage it's at right now. But with improvements, do you see that as a threat to this type of energy harvesting if it does sort of able to increase the efficiencies?
Yeah. For me, it is use absolutely everything. Get as many solar panels as you can. Get roads with piezoelectrics. Use what we've got. The only thing that's limiting us is investment and materials. But yes, I think that one of the I would love to go in Spain and America, where they have kind of desert areas covered with mirrors that reflect the solar light into a kind of point at the top, and they boil water at the top of it, and it generates huge. It's an energy generating plant, and it's just with mirrors focusing the energy. So yeah, there are areas in the world that we should use, and people. Some talks I gave, a while ago about wind energy, and I was kind of asking people's opinions on, what do you think, especially, I don't know how common they are to see in England, but in Scotland they're a very, very, very common sight. Wherever I go, I'm used to seeing them. From Glasgow, I see them on the hillsides around me, and I asked people what they thought, and many people were like, no, they're horrible, horrible things. But I think seeing things like solar fields, seeing things like wind turbines, I think it's quite wonderful. I think it's kind of, yes, they look different to the landscape, but to me they kind of stand for something as well. They're kind of like, we understand the importance of the environment and we're trying to work with it. So yes, they look alien and these things might look odd, but I think they're absolutely fantastic and exciting. And I'm excited when I see large solar fields and wind turbines and use all of these technologies.
Can you comment on, in terms of the efficiency of the heat converted into work, within the limits of the second law of thermodynamics? I know that, for example, in life, a cell is 60% efficient. Without sounding too pessimistic, we can't achieve that amount of conversion from heat.
Yeah. So thermoelectronics are woefully bad. The kind of first generation was up to maybe 10% efficiency they were working at. Second generation, the kind of generation we're working with now, maybe up to 15% efficiency. That's working at quite a good rate. Very, very low, and it's always, anyone's ever said, it's all just better than nothing, is the model that these work on.
Often when my students ask me about efficiency when I'm teaching them chemistry or physics, I often quote the figure 10 or 15% as a maximum, so I'm glad you said that. That was just
There's a question up the very back there.
With the piezoelectric effect, for example, would it be possible to generate electricity from the rise and fall of the tide, due to the tide?
I'm not sure. It would maybe be more appropriate in terms of waves. So the tides might be slow. Piezoelectrics looks for change. So I would maybe be looking more at waves buffeting things on a regular basis, that compression, release, compression, release, compression, release, rather than tides coming and going. But I think there would be better alternatives for harvesting the energy from waves. So we're already using kind of wave energy and using the kind of kinetic motion of waves and putting things out at sea and using the motion. So probably piezoelectrics would be maybe overkill for that situation where other ones could be better used. So vibrations and sharper compressions tend to be for piezoelectrics. In fact, I brought one example of piezoelectrics, which they were very white, the idea of setting a fire. And I was like, I promise you it's not a dramatic demonstration. That is it. Piezoelectrics are in electric lighters. It's the compression, and you hear it click. And that's because there's a piezoelectric element inside that sparks the... Which I was quite excited by. So they are around us right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about your piezo walkways.
There's a microphone just there.
Okay. Yeah, thinking about the piezo effect with the walkways. Very occasionally, when I can drag myself down the gym and I go on one of these running machines, I'm thinking, well, I'm pounding, sort of pounding away at that, and that is that sharp effect that you're looking for. Is there any possibility you could incorporate devices in these?
Definitely.
Machines.
Definitely. And gyms, I don't know, I've not heard of any gyms using them. But certainly everyone can say, a gym could use them. A gym could definitely use them because you have motion for the sake of motion. Right in a...
Anyway, because that's the reason you're there.
Yeah, I think a piezoelectric treadmill would be fantastic. I mein, the same way we put dynamos on bikes and stuff like that. When you're moving for the sake of moving, stick something in. So I would love, I'd love piezoelectric treadmills. I want bikes with dynamos. I think the bikes are already used in some gyms. And the other thing that I kind of spoke to Adidas about this was thermoelectric clothes for when you're out jogging. So when you're out jogging, you're sweating, giving off heat. They're absorbing that heat and charging a little kind of battery in your coat. Then you're not jogging and it's cold outside. You reverse the switch. You reverse it, so instead of it absorbing your heat, you put in the electricity and you heat one side and you cool the other side down. So I think that's just genius. So this kind of wearable device that you're out jogging, it's a thin layer, it absorbs your heat, powers your iPod, powers your MP3 while you're running, or it's a cold day, take a battery, stick it in your jacket, and your jacket will warm up because of the reverse effect. So there's a whole market for energy harvesting in terms of sport wear and sports gear. Even when you're doing kind of weights and things like that, you're moving. So kinetic, I have no idea what it would measure, but there could be some sensors in weights because you're talking movement for the sake of movement. It doesn't matter how heavy it is. You can install a device. You could work out how much you're moving it, how many calories you're burning, these kind of things. Huge amount of areas that could be involved in. Can I ask all of you a question? Can you put up your hand if you'd heard of piezoelectrics before? Wow, like everyone. And what about thermoelectronics? That's still most people. That's quite surprising. That is day to day. A lot of people have never kind of heard of the concept of it, but it is becoming more and more common. It's in places. That's quite exciting. God, you're probably all thinking, I know this. So that's us then. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for coming along. Thank you.